Welcome to Are You Awake? With Dr. Guldal Caba. When we can become clear and can state our intentions in our lives with this clarity, the world changes. The intention of our show is to change the world, a step and a show at a time. The world, through each individual, is changed for the better and transformed with awareness, attention, and intention. These shows are offered to you, any of you that are reaching out, so that you may find what you're looking for. Answers, paths, teachers, and most importantly, to learn to listen to the call of your soul. Our topics, guests, and input from you, our audience, are meant to stimulate thought, encourage growth and healing, to teach and inspire, to open the door, and to open hearts. We know this will change the world. Now, please welcome Dr. Guldal.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Are You Awake? I'm Dr. Guldal. I'm very excited about today's show. We are going to talk about parenting your parents, the joys, the pitfalls, the humor, and some really important strategies on what we can do. Our guest today, Jim Comer. Jim Comer has worked as a writer, speech coach, creative consultant, Fortune 500 companies like Avon, Universal Studios, Rockwell International. And then one day in 1996, his life took a sudden detour, and he had to quit everything in California, move back to Texas to take care of his parents. We are in such an age right now, for those of you that are followers of this show, you know that we like to talk about and cover as many different dimensions of living present, living joyful as we can. And being a parent to our parents is one of the things that change our lives so quickly. Most of us aren't ready for it. Many people resent it. Many people struggle. And some can find joy. And Jim is one of those people that's brought joy to this, that makes this, circle of life something wonderful. His website, whenrolesreverse.com, is also the name of his wonderful book, When Roles Reverse. And Jim goes on book tours, speeches, he does keynotes. We're going to keep talking about how wonderful you are, Jim, and let's just have you on the air. Welcome.
Well, listen, talking about how wonderful I am sounds just great.
Well, I can keep going. But, the audience needs to definitely go to your website, whenrolesreverse.com. Jim, tell me a little bit, or tell our, listening audience a little bit about what that moment was like for you. And how did you make that decision to leave your life? It's a big one.
Well, the first moment was a complete shock because I was sound asleep. I got a call from my parents' next-door neighbor in Dallas. In 34 years, she had never called me. So when I heard her voice, I knew in that instant that something terrible was about to happen.
Of course.
And she told me that my dad was wandering in the front yard, and she thought he was having a stroke.
Oh.
He was 86-year-old, and he'd been caring for my mother, who had early Alzheimer's, for about 5 years, and he was in total denial about it. So within a few hours, I had a father who couldn't walk, talk, didn't have control of his bodily functions, already was hard of hearing, and he was in intensive care. Mother didn't understand what was happening. I was an only child living 1,000 miles away, and we had no relatives in the town in which they were living. So it was the complete and utter catastrophe that you don't want to deal with. I was on a plane within hours, and I came back, and everybody expected that I would know what to do. But I didn't know what to do because my father was in denial, and he had never talked about anything. He would not talk about Mother's illness. He wouldn't talk about his finances, so I knew nothing.
Yeah, that's very common.
And I think I wrote the book primarily to help people not go through what I went through in those early months.
I think that's wonderful. We all need guides. We all need help.
Absolutely.
And most parents don't share that stuff with their children. They want to protect their children from that. I think that's, my experience in office working with people and being on the road like you, doing keynotes and speaking to people. Parents are always about protecting their children as if that's a protection somehow.
And, of course, it's just the opposite of a protection. It's the greatest gift that a parent can give a child is to be there for them and talked about all the issues that the children are going to face, that they've got their will, their powers of attorney, all their documents in place, that they've talked about their finances, that they've talked about insurance, all the things they want and don't want as they age. If they will do that, if families will really communicate, it will make all the difference in the world.
And it's interesting. I totally agree with you. And it's never too early to start that process.
Absolutely, because we don't have a crystal ball. We do not know when this is going to happen. Now, we think everybody thinks, oh, yeah, I'm going to live to be 93 and in great health. Well, the facts don't bear that out. Things may go wrong in the 50s or even the late 40s or the early 60s. We don't know when problems are going to occur. So the earlier that families can sit down and just talk about this. If the parents don't want to talk about it, then it's up to the adult children to bring up the subject. They need to have that, what I call the conversation.
The conversation.
Yes, the conversation. And sometimes it may be 10 conversations over a year. But the point is, the parents and the adult children, as many of them as they can get together, need to plan to have an afternoon or an evening where they sit down and there's no other subject. They just kind of go over all the areas and issues that could come up. It's so important for them to talk to each other candidly without any crisis happening. This conversation happened way before there's any crisis, so that when it does have a crisis, they're ready.
Well, that's absolutely right. Again, it's never too early to have that conversation. And what I often tell people in situations like this, Jim, and I'm sure that you do the same thing, is after you've talked about it, write it down because people hear what they want to hear.
Oh, right. So I have in my book, I have 50 questions that will save you time, money, and tears. And I have spaces under each question to write the answers. And that's just a place to start with. But it's a place that, can get the conversation going. And take some of the fear out of it.
That's wonderful that you have that. I looked at that, and that's why I brought this up, because I always believe that having it in writing, because 5 years later, a year later, 10 years later, people remember only what they remember.
Right. And everybody remembers differently.
Of course.
If there's 4 children, they'll have 4 different ways of remembering it.
Absolutely. And if there's spouses, then there's 8. So
there you go. But, most families don't have that conversation until after a stroke or a heart attack or a broken hip or something even worse, who knows, or the onset of Alzheimer's to where they can no longer ignore it, things like that. That's when most people begin to have the conversation.
That's exactly right. And it's always too late. People don't have the conversation because they think it's morbid.
And that's just the opposite of that. But the truth of it is they're going to be helping their parents, or the parents are going to be helping their children by having this conversation. I always tell people there are no meaningful conversations on a respirator. That's not the time to start.
That's right. Absolutely not.
And there's just some basic things that you need to know, like, do your parents have a will? Most people assume that their parents have a will. They've never seen it. They don't know where it is. They don't know if it's up to date. And the fact is, 7 out of 10 Americans do not have a will.
Is that really the number?
7 out of 6. I think it's 6.5. I'll round it off at 7. 7 out of 10.
Wow.
Remember John Denver, the great singer?
I do.
Yeah, well, John loved to fly experimental planes. He had an ex-wife and children by her, and a new wife, and he didn't have a will.
Oh, I never knew that.
$12 million estate, no will.
Oh, that's terrible.
So imagine where the money went to. Not where he wanted it to go.
Of course. Absolutely, of course. And these situations don't have to be morbid because it's about life. You could do it with humor. I understand that you wrote jokes for Joan Rivers and Phyllis Diller, Bob Hope. You've written jokes for these people. So you can also, in your book, I know, that you share some of the humor. And I think that's helpful for the conversation.
People come to my speeches and they're expecting a serious talk. And it is serious, but it's laced with all sorts of stories and funny experiences. I don't have to go very far. I just quote my parents and my own experiences because there was lots of humor.
That's great. And I think that would, another reason your book is so wonderful is it can help people have this conversation straightforward. This is life. Let's all know what we're doing so we don't have sibling fighting. We don't have in-laws fighting. We don't have the parents in their later days worrying about their children. I see that a lot. I see parents now worried for their children who are fighting over these things.
Yeah, the earlier that we can get everything out in the open, the better. Now, there may be some sibling disagreement. That's human nature. But the point is, the earlier you start talking about it, the easier it is to work these things out. For the most important thing is you need to know who's going to show up and who isn't going to show up for the parents. Some siblings will, and some siblings are going to be missing in action.
Do you think, Jim, in your experience, that who we think is going to show up is typically who does show up?
Well, it varies. I have a friend here in Austin. She had one sister, and the father died. Then a couple of years later, the mother began to have big health problems that were obviously going to get bigger. And within about 4 or 5 months of the mother getting ill, one of the sisters, not my friend, one of the sisters took a teaching job in Auckland, New Zealand, as far away on the planet as she could get from Austin, Texas. She never said, I'm not going to be part of Mother's care. She just went to Auckland, New Zealand, and has stayed there. And so that left her sister to do everything.
That's pretty telling.
Yeah, it is. I mean, she didn't want to have the conversation about, I'm going to not be there for Mother. She just moved to where she couldn't be any help. And, sometimes there are children that can't avoid not being on site because they live, 1,500 miles away and they have a job and a family that makes them stay there. But they can come in for visits. They can come in for a vacation, give the primary caregiver a break. They can make frequent phone calls. They can send money, if they need. There's lots of ways to show up without being the primary caregiver.
That's true. And I know the research has consistently bared out that whoever is closest, the closest female, if the female is not married or doesn't have children or not children in the house, so there does seem to be an order of expectation from the family of who should show up.
Yes, it usually is. Unfortunately, they seem to think it's going to be the one that lives the closest because that's just logistically the way it works out. But that may not be the right person. The one that lives the closest may not be the closest to the parents, or not emotionally or financially able to give what needs to be given. I mean, the parent might have to move. They may have to move near another child, or they may have to move if they have terrible health problems into some sort of a long-term health facility. It just depends on the situation of each family. There's one size does not fit all for this conversation. There's many, many answers to this, and they vary greatly.
And I think that's really important because families tend to have a built-in expectation that also should be addressed.
Absolutely.
Who are you thinking is going to do this?
Yeah, and this needs to be discussed. That's why it needs to be discussed early. Who is going to be the one that's going to be the main caregiver? Or maybe there'll be a couple of main caregivers. And this is going to require the parents to move out of their house. Well, that may bring up a whole other big issue. The parents may be absolutely determined against all logic to stay in their home. Well, that's going to be an issue. Can they afford to stay in their home? Can they afford to have people come in and do nursing care if that's needed? I mean, those are all issues.
And you address all these issues in your book?
Absolutely. Financial issues are one of the biggest, and as we all know, care is getting much more expensive every year. I mean, the average price for a nursing home, 1 year in a nursing home in the country today is around $65,000, and it's a lot higher than that on both coasts. And so, I mean, it could be $100,000 in some parts of the country. Well, how many families have more than a couple of $100,000 in savings? Very few.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's 2 years.
That's a lot of money, and that does seem to be the big issue more than anything else, is who's going to take care of it, who's going to pay.
Well, yeah, and most families simply are going to run out of money. And then there's Medicaid, which is because Medicare is under budgetary constraints, and so is Medicaid. And some states are even turning down Medicaid funds, like my state of Texas. And so there's all sorts of it's a political football right now. We don't know what kind of support from the government is going to be coming in the future. So families are going to be more and more responsible, not less responsible.
That's absolutely right. And this is a perfect place for us to take a break. But when we come back, we can just touch on Obamacare. I don't want to get into politics, but things are changing. And let's look at some of the humorous stories that you've bumped into. We'll be right back with Jim Comer when RollsReverse.com.
Internalized stress can cause our bodies to become weak, less productive, and can cause illness. Finding wellness can be difficult. Dr. Guldal is pleased to introduce a product to assist in bringing you to this wellness. in a manageable, efficient, effective way. This is Dr. Guldal's Inner Peace Method for awareness, activation, and enhancement. The first set within the Inner Peace Method includes a CD with exercises and a sacramental liquid copal, which will unite your body and mind, bringing clarity, health, and presence. A multidimensional shift. Discard your emotional and physical burdens. Go to innerpathicprocess.com and order your set of peace, presence, and balance today.
One of his students asked Buddha, "Are you the Messiah?"
No.
"Then are you a healer?"
No.
"Then are you a teacher?" The student persisted.
No, I am not a teacher.
"Well, are you a prophet?" he further queried.
No.
"Well, what are you?" he pleaded.
I am awake.
Thank you, everybody. Just to bring us back to speed, we're talking with Jim Comer. He wrote the book When Roles Reverse. His website is whenrolesreverse.com. Jim quit his job, very lucrative job in California, moved back to Texas to take care of his parents. And we started the break with talking about politics and what will happen with health care and where we are. And I just kind of mentioned Obamacare. And I think really what I just want to do to not make this a political show is to say clearly healthcare is changing. It's right here, right now, just happened. So we should all keep our eyes on the ball.
And the more that the family can be prepared, and the more that they have talked about this ahead of time, the options, the better off they're going to be.
And that is the caregivers in waiting that you talk about.
Right, because we're all caregivers in waiting. Rosalind Carter, the former First Lady, has a wonderful quote. She says there are four kinds of people in the world. People who have been caregivers, people who are going to be caregivers, people who are now caregivers, and people who are going to be getting care.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely right.
It covers the whole spectrum, doesn't it?
Well, it covers the cycle of life, definitely.
It does.
So you wanted to tell us the story about your mother.
Oh, well, I was so lucky because both of my parents had good senses of humor, and boy, that really made a gigantic difference in 15 years of care, because I moved back to Texas in '96, and Mom didn't pass away until 2010. So it was a long time with lots of different levels of care in there. But Mother's sense of humor stayed all the way through. And I can still remember she used to tell people, you know how much it cost me when Jim was born? $4 a day. And he's been worth every penny of it. So I tried to live up to her investment by being a good caregiver for all those years.
That's funny. When you moved back, were you prepared to see Alzheimer's? Most people just don't know what they're going to be facing. What was that like?
Didn't have the slightest idea, because when you come home for a visit at Christmas or in the summer, you're there a few days and you get a little taste of it, but it's nothing like being there on a day-by-day, regular basis. And I remember that those first couple of months when I really didn't, I was trying to feel my way into what it was like to be a caregiver. And Mother wouldn't wear most of the dresses in her closet in the retirement home. She thought they were stolen, and I couldn't convince her they weren't. She would only wear 5 dresses out of about 55. And then one day she asked me if we could go see her sister in a little town about 60 miles away. And that sounds like a logical question, except for the fact that her sister had been dead for 8 years. And I made a tremendous error. I told Mother that. I said, Mama, we can't go see Estelle. She's in heaven. And my mother had to relive the death all over again. She started crying, sobbing, tears running down her face. And I realized I'd made a tremendous error. I didn't need to tell her that, but I didn't realize what I should do. So I made an appointment with an Alzheimer's expert, and I went in there and I told her, I said, I don't think I can do this. And she said, honey, you don't have much choice, do you? You're an only child. I said, okay, well, what do I do? And she said, quit trying to drag your mother into your world. She can't go there anymore. Instead, you have got to go into her world. Go into her world.
The best advice anyone can give.
The best, absolutely the best advice I ever got. I started doing it that day, and that was in 1997, I think. And I did it for the next 15 years. And as Mother's world changed, as the disease progressed, as she began to lose more and more cognitive ability over the years, even to this part where she didn't know who I was, and in the last year couldn't talk, I matched where she was. I didn't expect her to be anything other than where the disease had taken her.
And, you know, when people do that, and I've worked in nursing facilities for a while, and I, work with people who are struggling with these issues as well. And when people can do that, then there's humor. They can actually have fun because you play again. You can play again.
Absolutely
and
right.
Silly things like a toothbrush, stirring the chili. You leave the chili, you come back, there's a toothbrush in there because Mom decided she had to stir the chili.
That's right.
Things can be funny.
I mean, the biggest mistake that so many people make is they correct their parents, or they try to expect their parents to be the way they were, or to be correct or right. When it's not important whether they're right, whether they're logical, it's important to love them. When faced with a choice between having your parents be right and being kind, I say to people, always opt for kind. I mean, my mother, one of the things she remembered was the fact that I used to run out of gas a lot. I mean, I was infamous for running out of gas, and my mother remembered that for years into her Alzheimer's. And the first thing she'd ask me when I'd come to see her was, Jim, how are you fixed for gas? She wanted to know. And, I mean, once she got that in her head, she might ask that question 5, 6, 7, 8 times in one visit. And I would answer it completely without comment 8 times, if that's how many times she asked it.
I can remember one time in the facility, this woman kept seeing cats under her bed. She had a dozen cats, but she didn't have any cats. But she was taking care of a dozen cats. They all had names. And I can remember one time she's sitting on the bed, picking them up and petting them. And I thought, well, I'm going to pet one too. So I asked her, I said, which one should I pet?
That's wonderful.
So we were both petting the cats and talking about the cats. And her face lit up, and she was happy, and she had joy for a minute. And I'm like, I can do this. I did this with children.
Right, it's very similar. I mean, I tell people, hone your acting skills. Get ready to improvise. This is your Meryl Streep moment. Just enjoy it. I remember when I first had to try to get my mother down to the Austin area, which is where our relatives were, which I had to get my parents down there that very first week because Dad had to go into rehab. And we had to have it down where I had some support. We didn't have any relatives in Dallas. But I had to get my mother down there, too. And she was refusing to leave. She wouldn't leave the house. Yeah. So the day they were going to move, I went in. I thought I had to do something to get her in the car. I packed for her the night before. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I walked in, and I said, Mom, would you like to go get some ice cream? Mm-hmm. This is 8 in the morning, but my mother loves ice cream. She put her coffee cup down, got a big smile, and walked with me, got in the car, and we drove away from her house of 34 years. But she was happy because we were going to get ice cream, and I did get her a sundae, too.
I would hope so.
That's how I got her. That's how I got her into the car.
And those are the moments that you can still have love and connection and joy. It doesn't matter whether it's in this universe or their universe. So
right.
Moving into that's so important. Of course, it isn't easy. It's painful to see someone you love, the rock in your life, to be this now. But that is life. I mean, there's nothing we cannot change it. Buddha once said that the very definition of suffering is wanting what we can't have. The moment we surrender to what is, all kinds of possibility happens. And psychologists know that, doctors know that. What is where we are, surrender to it, accept it, and then see what blossoms.
Right, and then begin to enjoy the things that remain, because there are wonderful things there. I mean, I got so much closer to my parents during those years. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd formed a relationship with them that was so real and personal, and it's not the same as coming back for a 3-day visit or a 5-day visit. When you're there and you're going through things together, you really get close.
Absolutely.
And in many families, long-time resentments can be healed. There can be real coming together. And most of all, you know that you're doing the right thing when you show up for your parents. And there's a great sense of joy in that.
It helps you go to bed at night and sleep well.
It does. And you're going to have wonderful memories. You're going to build up some great memories. There are going to be some tough times, but what I want people to know is that caring for your parents is not one long, downhill, depressing ride. That's not the way it is at all. It's much more like a roller coaster. There's going to be surprises, and there's going to be laughter, and there's going to be amazing stories, and there's also going to be tough times and difficulties. But it's everything. It's just life, only older.
That's right. So they're going to hurt, you're going to hurt, you can laugh, you can have connection, you can have love. Of course, Jim, not everybody's going to be able to quit their job and be there 24/7. Those that do that, or those that can be, that's great. However you can show up for them is how we can show up for them. There's no right way.
That's exactly right. And one of the ways that's important is just keeping in good communication. A phone call, a visit, or coming for a week in the summer and giving the caregiver a break so they can take a little time off. Those kinds of things, those can be worked out.
Well, that's the other thing. Just to touch briefly, the caregiver does get tired. The primary caregiver gets extremely tired, and the resentment and the burnout is very quick. And sometimes life is harder for the caregiver than the one being cared for. So if you can't be primary, make sure that you attend to what the caregiver's needs may be.
That's right, because the facts are that there's a lot of illness, a lot of burnout, and often the caregiver may be the one that passes away before the one being cared for because of the stress on the job. So they need all the help and support they can get, and they need to ask for that. So often, caregivers don't ask for what they need. They don't ask for the support they need. They don't join support groups in their own town. They don't ask people for the help that is there for them. They don't find the agencies that can give them support. So I really push that very hard.
Well, that's good that you do, because most often caregivers are so wrapped up in being caregiver they don't realize they have needs or they're allowed to have them.
That's exactly right.
It becomes very, very important to do so. One last thing as we're going to wrap up here, Jim, I can't thank you enough for being here again. WhenRolesReverse.com, Jim Comer, Comer. What we're talking about, if we really step back from it, can be generalized to every single relationship in life. Meet people where they are, connect to them, love them, play with them, stand firm in what you need, and move forward. That's true for all relationships, definitely for our aging parents, but to keep in mind, if we can learn these skills, we need to use them in all places.
That is absolutely true. And for me, this has probably been the most important thing I've done in my life. I spent a lot of years trying to be an actor, trying to make it in the glamorous worlds of New York and L.A., and the truth of it is the most important work I ever did were those 15 years I spent caring for my parents. I would have never predicted that, but that was absolutely the best decision I ever made, to come back here and show up for my parents.
And the sincerity of that and the authenticity of that is very clear in the tone that you just spoke from your heart. And may our listeners enjoy that, savor that. And Jim, now you get to help others do the same thing. What a wonderful, wonderful calling.
It's such a great feeling. It is. When I'm speaking to groups and I see people get it, I see them, the looks on their faces change, or they relax, or they talk to me afterwards and we can answer questions. That is the greatest feeling, because I know they're going to leave that place and they're going to behave differently. They're going to have a different attitude, and that's a great feeling.
So who would have known that doing the greatest thing for your heart turns out to be your calling in the end?
Isn't it interesting you use that word, because that's the word I use, my calling. It is my calling.
And it's wonderful. We're very, very grateful for you on the show today. Very grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank
you.
You're such a wonderful person to connect with, because you absolutely get it.
Well, thank you for that. I do my best. That is my calling. That is my calling, to do my best to help people find theirs. And you're out there and you're doing your work. We're grateful for it. And now our listeners know where to go. And if you want Jim Comer to come speak for a presentation, workshop, any of those wonderful things that he does, it's on the website, how to reach him. Make sure you go out and get his book. Jim, I can't thank you enough.
I enjoyed it very much.
And thank you for helping everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating in today's show. If you have any questions, ideas, or comments, Email us at info@areyouawakeshow.com.